All right. Hello and welcome to another edition of Fishing for Answers. Today I've got Cody Burrows with us. He is a CISO as well as the VP of Information Assurance at Chase, correct?
Correct. But just to be clear, all of my comments today are my own and not reflective of Chase.
Yes, got to get that legal out of the way right away. But you have some really good opinions. We were talking a little bit before the show, but maybe before we jump into that, uh, tell us a little bit about yourself. How did you get into cybersecurity?
Like a lot of people in my generation, security didn't even exist whenever we were starting this all out. How
Isn't that the
computers
truth?
computers weren't what they are today. But honestly, I started. I'm one of those that had a Mac 2 in sixth grade, and they gave me the prerequisite. Half an hour on it, and then said the smart kids were going to be able to do it, and I wasn't one of them. And so that was enough to make me get my parents to buy me a TI 99 4A, and I started learning how to code from there. So yeah, we learned a lot about computers growing up, but then went into the Navy and as a fire controlman on submarines. And from there, learned a lot about security and the hardware and how that worked. So I had a good understanding of coding and the hardware and security, and then went into Raytheon and started learning about how SDLCs worked and how requirements worked and how a program actually came together. And from there, started learning about more of the security at the time. Learned more about um, pen testing. It was just starting. We didn't even call it pen testing. It was just, hey, can you keep saying all these bad things are going to happen. Can you show it to me? And started showing them. And the next thing I know, I'm doing a lot of testing, and then ended up going into Visa and being able to be an in-house pen tester for Visa, and then took over for doing a lot of the security, the perimeter security for NASDAQ, and continued my journey of learning everything having to do with security from there, to the point to where my pen testing background was I was strong on the technical side, but started learning that more of the managerial side is where the decisions are made. And so started learning about how to manage people, manage projects, manage situations, and that's how I got to where I'm at today.
That's awesome. A recurring theme, training or teaching yourself to code in high school. I know I did it. I've had a ton of other guests that were very similar. I think it's this personality type that wants to know how things work, and which leads to, well, I want to write code, and so very cool. Now, ethical hacking, that is also a place where I spent a great deal of time. And I know there was a very specific moment for me when I realized that I really wasn't providing the amount of value that I felt like I should be through the penetration testing, and that I was almost playing a game of got you or gotcha. And that's what really led me down the path to, initially go into the CISO role or into management, and then down the road to found a company. Was there a moment like that for you?
Absolutely. And there's a whole bunch of sayings that I play in my head all the time. And what I think you were talking about is where there's an ego that can definitely come from being a pen tester. The fact is we see what nobody else sees because
Oh,
we're
yeah.
we're going in and we're looking, the point of view that you get as a pen tester, um, nobody nobody has it, unless
Mhm.
you're I guess. And trying to relay that over is honestly one of the biggest failings, that a lot of people just in security have. The fact is that our egos get in the way a lot. We need to look at security as something where we're an advisor. We're mentoring those that don't have that knowledge that we do from being in the system. And there's nothing like being on somebody's system and they don't know it, and getting gathering their credentials and then using them in ways they're not expecting. I had one guy that it was kind of funny. We found a domain controller that wasn't consistent with all the other domain controllers, and it was too good. It was fully patched. It was hardened. It didn't have a lot of the normal faults that I was seeing in all the rest of their domain controllers.
Is it a honeypot?
Well, yeah, well, that was what I was concerned about, because whenever I came on it, it took me. I had already compromised all the domain controllers the first day, and was in like Flynn, no problems. And then all of a sudden, they started reporting that there was another domain controller, but it wouldn't let me in. And I was like, okay, that doesn't make any sense. And it took me about 2 days to get into it. And whenever I finally did, I was like, wait a minute, this thing's too nice. and, and so one of the things that people don't think about is that if you're an attacker, one of the ways to be stealth is to make sure you're not a problem, because what brings a sysadmin quicker than, hey, whatever's down or whatever's broken, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
Most of the
so,
time when we got caught, that was the reason. It wasn't that a user was like, "Oh, there's something suspicious." They were just either a phishing email. They didn't understand the instructions clearly enough, so they're asking whoever we're impersonating, "Hey, what did you want me to do?" Or it was, "Hey, my computer's not acting right." But it was almost never somebody actually reporting what we did. It
right.
was the outcomes of what we did.
Right. Well, this was one where it looked too nice, and so I went to the CISO I was working with and said, hey, this does not look right. And we got the head sysadmin. It was really funny because he'd never seen this domain ad or this domain controller. And come to find out, one of the contractors that was working for the company had gotten really tired of dealing with their domain controllers and and them not working. He promoted one of his own to a domain controller, and was running it smoothly so that he could get his work done. And none of the sysadmins knew about it. And so one of the funny things about that one is once we finally got that figured out, I watched him go down to the start, and he goes up and he looks over. He goes up and looks over, and I realized what he was doing. I look over at the CISO, and I just kind of nodded to him to look. And that admin looks at me and goes, "Who are you? Who are you logged in under?" And I'm like, "You're the sysadmin. You ought to know." And he goes, "Well, it looks like you're logged in as me." I went, "And?" And he goes, "Well, you can't do that." And I go, "Why not?" He goes, "It's against policy." I went, "This is a pen test, buddy."
No policy here. Let
I
me tell
mean,
you about something called dynamic scoping. We use it all the time.
yeah. Well, the funny thing is that in the room we've got the CIO who did not realize what was going on. We've got the head sysadmin, and we've got the CISO, and all of a sudden he's really upset. And this actually gets back to what I was talking about earlier, where we need to have a mentoring mindset whenever we're pen testers. And by the way, in just general security, the fact is that he left for the day. He was that distraught. He was very upset, and whenever he came back, I actually got onto his computer and then called him, and I asked him to explain why he was upset, and started working with him. And he actually was responsive, and he kept on saying, "But I'm the I'm God of this network." Nobody knows and has the controls I do. And I'm like, yeah, but you don't always know that you're compromised. And he's like, of course I know. And so I was already on the system, and I'm like, okay, if that's the case, why don't you bring up a command line or a browser? I can't remember which. And why don't we walk through something real quick? And as soon as he brought it up, I killed it. And go ahead.
Oh no, go ahead and finish that statement. I was just thinking that really leads to another conversation that I think would be really worthwhile to have. And but go ahead and finish first.
Well, basically, I kept killing it. He got curious about what was going on, brought up Task Manager, started looking through all the things. He couldn't find me on there, and eventually, I let him know that I was actually on there. And the thing was, is I did it in private, so it wasn't a matter of embarrassing him in front of everybody. It wasn't a matter of my ego and showing him how stupid he was and how smart I was. It was more a matter of, in his mind, that stuff goes on in Hollywood. It's not real. And he really had all the keys to the kingdom and nobody else did.
Yeah.
And in taking that away from him and helping him understand how vulnerable he was, all of a sudden I mentored him into a better understanding of why the pen test reports were important. And then all of a sudden we started making traction. And the point of security in a pen test, it's not for our egos to show how stupid everybody else is. The point of it is to actually remediate the issues and allow and this is something that a lot of us miss, is it's the making sure the business is able to do what the business needs to do to make us all money. That's the
Yeah.
point. It's
That
not
is the
about
whole
the
reason
idea.
that we're here, and
Exactly.
too many people do not understand that, and they think, it's all about cybersecurity. No, cybersecurity is a means to an end, and the end is profit. And so, no, I couldn't agree more, and I think that business case is often lost on people in cybersecurity because they get way too into the weeds. Um, but you mentioned that this admin had this idea that hacks really only happened in Hollywood or things like that. I really do think that that's one of those sacred cows, if you will, or whatever that we really have to slaughter here, and we have to confront it with our users. That listen, it's not just Hollywood. And when they realize that, I really do think it changes their mindset a little bit. But to the greater point here, this is part of the reason that admin or that story that you gave is part of the reason I'm very passionate about role-based training. In my experience as an ethical hacker, and I'm curious if you've seen the same thing, but the user gets all the bad reputation for letting the bad guys into the network, whether it's by opening an attachment or clicking a link or typing in their credentials or whatever they happen to do. But there's so much more beyond that. I found that it was the mistakes of the IT and network admins that allowed me to get the full keys to the kingdom very quickly once I got in the network. And it was the mistakes of, different departments that might allow me into some of those more critical systems like, card holder, data platform or data management platform. And then it was those mistakes even of even our information security team, like not staying on top of the latest MITRE attack framework trends that allowed us to not get discovered. And I feel like so much of the time we're putting all of the focus around security awareness training on the user and these, handful of mistakes, but forgetting about all of the other mistakes that can also lead to utter compromise. Is that what you saw? Oh,
You're doing one of the things that I think we're all fighting, and that is pointing the fingers. And look, like I said, we're all doing it. We all run into the, okay, something bad happened, something went wrong, hey, we got a report, it's telling on us, or hell, we had a breach. Um, the quickest way to stop the bleeding is to stop worrying about who made the mistake, because the fact is the CISO and the C-suite are ultimately accountable, and we delegate the responsibility down through the ranks. But if all we're doing is looking for who we're going to beat on about it, this kind of gets to a carrot and stick situation. The fact is that it's self-defeating.
So I think you misunderstood my question slightly, and I agree with what you're saying, that we don't want to be blaming or pointing the finger. What I was really trying to drive at is that there's so much additional training beyond what we're typically doing that needs to be done across all levels of the enterprise in order to more holistically address human error. Right now, I guess what I was trying to say is we focus on just a handful, maybe 5 common human things, errors that happen again and again, but we miss a lot of the other stuff. And to me, it's not about pointing the finger, it's about designing our training to be holistic so that it addresses those errors at every level so that our people have the training that they need.
Look, we need to do training, although a lot of places can get into overtraining. I think that at one point, whenever I was at a large bank, I had over 2 weeks. I think heading on to 2 weeks is a good way to put it. It was like 67 hours of training a year.
Wow.
Um,
I
where
worked for the SEC for a while and the FDIC, so I know a thing or two about about the god awful amounts of training. And I agree that that's actually been proven through countless academic studies to have zero impact on security.
Well, here's the thing. I think that you're talking about role-based training. I think that this is where, and you got to be careful about overtraining. You've got to be careful about it's social engineering users in a positive way to be able to get the outcome that we're all looking for, and that is an
Agreed.
awareness of what to look for. It's teaching your kid to not jump into a van because the guy
Free
has some
candy.
candy. You don't want them walking around and every time they see a van, they're scared to death and run away from the van. But you also don't want them to to jump into the van with the candy. And so how do we hit that sweet spot? And in that, it's identifying, if training is identifying where there is a gap, and then goes back to what I was talking about earlier, where we're acting as a mentor for, okay, here's what you missed. I don't think this is nearly as common as it used to be. The misspelling in the email, or the
That's
uh,
almost a sign that it's a legit nowadays with
yeah, actually. But it's a matter of letting people know what they need to be looking for. And one of the things, I actually got in trouble at that same bank because whenever I found what looked like a legitimate fish, I hit the hey, this is a fish, to send it off to the security team. But I also shot out an email, a wide distribution email to everybody saying, hey, looks like we've got a fish. Here's the subject header. Here's what to look for. And they came back and started getting upset with me because I ruined their test. And they even tried to say that I went against the key controls that we're all bound by. And it was kind of funny because I would go, okay, show me in the key controls where that is, and nobody could do it. And I said, on top of that, you are inhibiting the exact behavior that you are wanting. Because if this had been a real fish, of course you want for everybody to start telling everybody else, hey, there's a problem. It's a herd mentality. I actually raise goats, and it's funny. All it takes is one goat to see the fox or whatever else. They start telling everybody else, and then everybody faces the fox and addresses the issue. And a fox taking out a small, one of the babies, is pretty easy. The fox taking out a whole bunch of ticked off protective mothers is a whole nother thing for the fox. And whenever you're dealing with phishing, I absolutely want everybody to, start raising alarms and saying, "Hey, we've got a problem." Even if it is a training situation where you want to enhance that, not get upset about it.
Oh, I couldn't agree more. I actually think that that this is a really good segue into social engineering for good. So a little bit about my background. I actually, when I first decided to found this company, I asked the question, well, how do we use social engineering for good? And that just really led me down the behavioral science rabbit hole, which ended up with me speaking at a conference over in Ireland. And next thing I know, I was asked to co-author some college coursework on exactly this: how do we build effective security awareness training programs? And the core theme in there was behavioral science. And
Hmm.
so I got this opportunity to sort of collaborate. And I know there's a number of sort of behavioral science principles or tactics that I've learned over the years that I would classify as social engineering for good. One of the key ones, and I think it goes to what you were talking about earlier about how you got to be careful with training fatigue, is called spaced learning theory, and it's the foundation of advertising. And what it says is that if we can break things into tiny little bite-sized chunks and we feed it to people at a high frequency, you get really good retention. And so that's why we see our advertisements when we were a kid were 60 seconds, but now they're 12 seconds, 10 seconds, 15 seconds. In fact, a
We still
30
remember
second
where's the
ad is
beef.
long these days. That's how the direction we see advertising going. But what I realized early on is that this very much applies to security awareness, and we've got to do more to truly break this down into bite-size chunks. I say truly because there's been a lot of content that's 3 to 5 minutes long that's sort of um, called micro training. And what I found is I can't keep the user's attention more than a minute. So even at 5 minutes, we're already at beyond this younger generation's attention span, and we've seen it. All the studies show that people's attention spans are shrinking, and all theories point to social media, which it makes sense. But as a result, I think we've got to shrink down our training too.
I I would agree with that. And you've also, it was not until later that I started understanding why all those math algorithms and things that we learned about actually mattered. In that, whenever I was going through school, it was just a lot of learning, rote, you know, what's the quadratic equation and how do you break it down into all of its components, right? I didn't have an understanding of why. And because of that, I didn't learn as much as I should have.
Oh,
And
me too.
so, yeah, no, I look, I think this is most of us. But where I excelled was actually trigonometry and geometry, because I could look at it and understand it very quickly. I think that's one of the bigger things that with most training we miss. In other words, I can sit there and I can tell you, don't click on email, but do your job. And that's contradictory and it doesn't make sense. And I don't know, okay, what is it I'm supposed to be dealing with? An example of a positive phishing training is whenever you actually click on the example and it comes up and it says, "Here's what you should have seen," and how you could have caught that, and then explain how that might have affected the rest of the business. In other
Yeah.
words, what do you have access to that might be sensitive to everybody. You know, the SharePoint that has all the PCI information, which is kind of a nightmare to most of us,
It's
or
not in
something. What?
SharePoint. I said, I hope it's not in SharePoint.
Yeah, well, that actually goes past. The reason why I bring that up is because that goes past. You and I both know that your PCI information, your credit card data, should not be in a SharePoint. But in your pen testing, how many times did you just simply type PCI whenever you had access to the SharePoint, and all of a sudden all the Excel spreadsheets started coming up, right?
Oh, plenty of times.
Right.
In fact, well, let's just say that we worked for a lot of very large organizations. And so the flag, that I kept, I guess, continued on was that whoever was the pen test, ran the pen red team would run a transaction there, and you'd have to find their credit card number and like present it back.
Right.
And because we were working and definitely are testing into a lot of production environments, and I can't tell you how many times we were just, I mean, it was so easy. We didn't even have to know the full person's name. Like one of the times, the person whose credit card was in there went by their middle name. And so no one knew that until we got in and started digging for credit cards, and were able to find it. But it was always because it wasn't properly protected. It wasn't properly segmented. And I think, it's not that people don't care about being more secure. It's that they don't know how. And when they don't know how, they take the path of least resistance. And that's how we end up with credit cards and SharePoint.
Well, and that's why I'm saying, if in our training, if you catch somebody phishing, and
Hmm.
then you can transition this into how this might actually affect them personally. Now all of a sudden people are going to go, oh God, had that have been real, yeah, I could have lost a million credit cards or whatever, the social security numbers, whatever sensitive information. Or I could have given, you'll again, going back to the sysadmins, just taking that extra time to train him and get him to understand how vulnerable he really was. I guarantee you that the rest of his life, he went through and goes, it's not in Hollywood, man. It's really not. I've seen it in real life. And at that point, he trained more people, and now all of a sudden, it's not just the phishing and the ransomware and hey, everything will get encrypted and that. It's taking those opportunities to actually give meaningful training that broadens it so that they take part, and then they will train other people. And now all of a sudden you get that's how you build a culture.
Yeah. So going back to the CISO that you were talking to, that was very against phishing because he felt like it was very heavy with the stick. If we go all the way back there, one of the things that I've seen, and you just hit on, was, you said make sure that they have that training and the moment that they click. And so one of the things that we've realized is that when somebody realizes that mistake, whether it's the IT admin or whether it's the end user clicking on a fish, they're actually going through an emotional response. And that emotional response has been proven to increase retention because it's quite literally creating new neural pathways. And so I bring that up because I see a lot of times where people run phishing simulations as part of their security awareness program. It's very different if it's a pen test, but they run phishing simulations as part of their security awareness program. And then they check whether or not the user will type in their credentials, and they do what I call exploiting the user. And I think that is one of those sticks that not only makes our training less effective because we miss out on that just in time training, but on top of that, it makes it that much worse because if the user doesn't immediately realize their mistake, things can fester and get out of control. Like the example I like to use is the person who gets the fish saying that they're getting a raise, who was already, hoping for a raise or had convinced themselves that they were deserving of a raise. And then they go and they try and log in and they can't. And so, in the time that it takes for whoever to reach out to slap their hand because they typed in their credentials, they go around bragging to everybody that they got their raise. And that just, went from an emotional high to an emotional low very quickly. And those are the types of scenarios that I think we have to avoid. And
They're
so,
very detrimental. Yes.
yeah, and that's one of the reasons that I've always been very much a fan of just-in-time training at the moment that mistake is realized, because that's your best time to train them.
I fully agree. And the CISO I'm talking about, it's not that I disagreed with him at all, because
Oh, I agree, by the way.
A lot of I've seen a lot of training where you just go, it's about ego. There, all you're doing is saying, I got 70% of them to click on it, and look how bad we are, and we need to spend more on this. Like, it's literally the beatings will continue until morale improves, which is just, it's asinine. You're absolutely correct, but it's also, it's just in time, but it's also, I actually was just dealing with an organization, and I got hit by two fishes, and I'm supposed to know what I'm doing, right? And I go back, and for both of them, I went back and I'm like, okay, what is it I could have seen? And I hover over the link, and it comes up with proof point and then a bunch of garbage that there's no chance of me being able to decipher unless I actually put it through.
That's the reason I'm not a big fan of URL rewriting, because it takes away the ability to hover.
Right. Well, and then I go through and I'm looking for, okay, is it Cyrillic A? And okay, what is it that I could have caught? I'm okay that I made a mistake, but I want to learn from it. That's,
Yeah,
that's the whole thing.
absolutely.
I go through and I cannot find anything that would have alerted me or had any, it was actually topical to what I was dealing with, because as part of me helping them, I was in their onboarding packets, so I'd already gotten a bunch of training, and one of them was for training. I'm like, okay, it's another training, and it looked like their other training. And I went back and I actually asked the guy, I'm like, what is it that I could have done? And he's like, oh, we copy and pasted it from the real one. And the only difference is like the URL, and even that was, in other words, they'd done everything to make sure that it was fully obfuscated. I'm like, okay, so what is it that I could have learned from this? How am I supposed to know this from it? And he goes, oh no, that's the whole point. You're not supposed to.
So
Okay.
I might add that you just defeated the whole purpose of phishing in this scenario, because to me, why do we fish? We fish to train people on the different red flags. That's why we run simulations
And that's why I bring this up.
for it. Yeah, and if there's no red flags, then there's no learning. And if there's no learning, then all we're doing is abusing our employees for no reason. And so
Actually, all you're doing is basically getting people to go, it's those jerks in security on an ego trip again. And the next time, you're not even dealing anything with phishing or with email or anything. You're talking about, hey, we need to do an IP address rewrite, or whatever else. Nothing to do with it. And all of a sudden, they're already ticked off about it. And
there's a whole nother factor here too, though, that I think people don't think about enough before they do that gotcha. And that is learned helplessness. There is this group of people inside of every organization, because it's a significant percentage of
I
people.
can't do anything
And
about it.
yeah, and so they go in thinking, "Hey, I'm really good at spotting scams." But then the IT people, they use inside information, and they use tricks, and there's no red flags, like you said. And all of a sudden, this person that thought they were really good at detecting scams now has no confidence in their ability to detect them. And because of that, they become less secure, because as soon as they give up on that confidence, they're like, oh, I guess I'm not good. They don't try as hard, and they end up clicking on more fish. And so there's a lot of danger there, just besides just making everybody mad at the InfoSec team, which honestly, we should be bridging the gap. If anything, we're bridging the divide. And we don't want to be Dr. No, like you said. So,
Well, I started off saying we need to be more of the advisor. Well, what is it that you just advised me? I'm an idiot. Nobody would stick around for
Yeah,
more of I'm an idiot.
I know I wouldn't.
Nobody would. I mean, but that's where I agreed with that CISO. He's right that there are a lot of ways that people run the email training programs where it is just morale. Beatings will continue until morale improves, and that's antithetical to what you really want.
Yeah, morale's
Really,
not going to improve.
yeah, well, exactly. And learning is not going to improve. And honestly, for any number of reasons, there's a lot of backlash that will happen that doesn't need to.
Well,
We
and
need,
other business impact that I think is outside of just security that people don't think about. Like when you run a heavily punitive program in any department that people have to work with in any sort of regular basis. And the example I'll use is like that 3 strikes and you're out, you fall for 3 fish, you get fired type of approach. Well, what happens is that you have people go from a growth mindset into a fixed mindset. And that's when your company stops innovating, their sales start declining, and they run the risk of going out of business. And so there are a lot of there's a lot of behavioral science that has been studied at great length that we're just not applying to cybersecurity yet. And I think it's natural because we're still learning cybersecurity in some ways, and the part that we needed to know all along was behavioral science, yet we're still not training it. There's not a whole lot of programs that incorporate that into it. And so, it's no one's fault, but we've got to incorporate more behavioral science into what we do. One of the things that we've found works really well for helping to offset that negative reaction is just making a game of cat and mouse out of phishing. Hey, let me tell you about this attack that pretends to be from your finance team. Now be on the lookout because the next time you see it, it might be me or it could be the real bad guys. And that gets this hyper vigilance. And more importantly, if they do fall for it, they were told. They're not mad. They're not upset anymore because we changed the script and we turned it into a positive experience.
Well, I've also seen where you got attaboys for identifying it. In other words, if you,
Oh, yeah.
I think this is a fish, and all of a sudden I get 15. I'm a good boy bucks. That helps. It's also whenever something that it literally doesn't cost a dime. But whenever somebody hits it's a fish, and it actually is, it goes to their boss, and their boss knows them, and then comes back around and simply says, "Hey, I saw that you did a good job. That you caught that. Hey, good job."
Yeah. Our cyber coach literally calls them a cyber hero when they report fish, whether it's one of ours or a real one. But I think that those attaboys are very, very important and too often overlooked. We tell people when they do bad, but we don't tell them when they do good. And to me, telling them when they do good is as important, if not more important, than telling them when they've made a mistake. And when we do tell them about a mistake they've made, it needs to be constructive. Not, hey, you're an idiot, but hey, here's a couple ways that you could have helped maybe avoid this mistake. And so it really is in how we craft that language too, because, we do all the right steps, but then we say, hey, you need to think more before you click. Well, that's probably going to turn them off because it's a little aggressive.
It's FUD.
So,
How long have we been trying to fight FUD, fear, uncertainty, and doubt? If it's a matter of making people fearful of email, just exactly how does that help the business?
it
I don't
doesn't.
see it.
They need to learn how to use it securely, just like we don't train kids to be scared of the street. We train them to look both ways before they cross the road. And I think that that productivity hit needs to be, contemplated. Because like to your point, it can't just be fear and nothing else. They have to just know how to use their email in a more secure manner.
But I think that one thing that is important is like if you have somebody that like that sysadmin before I got hold of him,
I like
that's
how you
somebody
word
who's very sense what?
I like how you worded that before I got a hold of him.
Well, whenever I got a hold of him, he was on a path that was very detrimental to the business, right? And the position that he held is very sensitive. I mean, there's the CEO cannot shut down the company as fast as a rogue sysadmin or somebody with his permissions.
Yeah, that's true.
So the thing is that whenever you have those sensitive positions, you need to be able to, you need to be able to have a balance with the carrot and the stick. Your average user who has average permissions and who is not dealing with hypersensitive credentials or data, you can be a lot more lenient on. But you also need to drive home it's not Hollywood with those that are dealing with the sensitive information. One of
Hmm.
the things, we're talking about how social engineering works. If you walk into a room that smells, you only really smell that bad smell for the first 5 minutes at most before your brain acclimates to it and says, yeah, I got it, it smells. And usually you can block it out.
Yeah.
One of the things that we run into is that there are certain positions that they're so used to running around with domain admin or whatever social security numbers or credit card numbers that they get blind to it.
Yeah.
And with those people, whenever those get hit, you need to take that extra training and give them extra awareness of how critical their role is to what we're doing and how they can affect the business. And it's one of those where it's striking the balance. There has to be a balance between it's not all Pollyannish and it's not all oh, you're a good boy even though you stole the thing. Um, uh, it's more a matter of the roles that are less sensitive can be handled in a more general way and employ a lot of the positives that we're talking about. But you also need to identify. In other words, if training is more about identification instead of this just beating on people, three strikes and you're out. Well, you never told me how, you never told me or trained me as to how I don't run into this again. And yet I keep on, now I'm afraid of landmines because
Yeah.
that's really what you're doing. Well, take them in and have a session like I did with that sysadmin. Have actually do a tabletop where you walk through, hey, you're somebody who works with our PCI on a regular basis. One of the interesting ones here is call centers. Call centers are considered, the entry level job, the high turnover rate, all those kind of things. These are people that generally don't get a lot of training, and yet they are the ones that are dealing with our credit cards, right? And so whenever somebody like that gets phished, you want to take extra time to train them into how sensitive the information they are dealing with can be exploited.
Yeah.
So it's a matter of at a certain point you're doing the carrots, but you're also, whenever it's more sensitive, you want to use it as identification, not as the stick.
So there's this behavioral science principle called identical elements theory. And it explains why, when somebody buys a new car, for example,
Mhm.
they instantly start seeing it all over the road. And it just talks about how when you learn about something really well for the first time, you'll start to recognize it everywhere. And I highlight this theory because it's really applicable when it comes to cybersecurity and driving the behavior that we want out of people. We want them to be more secure. And
Mhm.
so, if we can help them learn the small handful of common red flags like
Mhm.
urgency, authority,
Double checking,
sunken
just yeah,
cost, things like that, right? If we help them learn it, they'll start to see it everywhere, not just in phishing simulations.
exactly.
And this is all happening at a subconscious level. And there's this really great book that's called Thinking Fast and Thinking Slow. And it talks about how we basically have two brains, one that is our logical slow brain, and one that is our subconscious fast brain.
Fight or
And
flight.
yeah, and so the examples are, if you're doing that math problem, you're using your logical slow brain. But if your reflexes kick in and block something from going into your eye, that's your fast brain. And to put it into perspective, if your conscious brain is moving at 1 mile per hour, well, your subconscious brain is moving at about 5,000 miles per hour. And so whenever we see incidents, almost every single time, the person that was initially let them into the network says, I knew something was off. I should have trusted my gut. And we hear this over and over again when we analyze incidents after the fact. And so I think, we have to train people that you do have a built-in antivirus. It's your subconscious or your gut,
Something's
and
not
you've
right here.
got to trust it. And but it requires that we train them on that. And then it requires that we condition them and fill their antivirus with virus definitions, if you will. And that, to me, is why we run phishing simulations, why we run threat simulations in general, why we do tabletops, because it helps put these things into their subconscious. And then when they avoid a phish because their subconscious said it was risky, they don't even realize that they did it, often consciously at all. They just delete it and move on, or report it and move on. Whereas when they avoid it consciously, we still run the risk of the curiosity getting the best of them. And one of
We're
the
just being in a
studies,
hurry.
oh, yeah, that too. But I saw this one study that found that there's this group of people that think that their work environment is so secure that there's no way it could get hacked. So when they get a suspicious email to their personal address, they just forward it to work and open it there. And to me, that is why we've got to start focusing less on the conscious and the knowledge side of this, and more on the subconscious and the instinct side of this.
With everything, you'll notice I'm a real big proponent of balance. If you go one side or the other, we usually miss whatever it is. Doesn't matter what it is.
Fair.
And so it's a matter of, we're hitting around all the right spots, right? We're talking about there needs to be carrot with the stick. There needs to be more training, but not overtraining. We need to think of the conscious and the subconscious. I was just talking about the fact, if I don't know why I'm learning about a quadratic equation, then it doesn't, there's no correlation to why I care, right? And so consciously, we need to make sure that they understand how sensitive their positions are, but we also need to bolster the subconscious where if it doesn't feel right, just hit the I think this is a phish button, and go on, right? Don't be afraid to hit that. And whenever you're hitting on all cylinders is when you're hitting all of the, whenever you're hitting those medians that matter.
And to your point about the why, countless studies have shown that when you can connect the dots for somebody, it makes that training 15 times more effective.
Yeah.
Because now it's contextual to their access, their job, their role. And that makes all the difference in the world, because one is just, doesn't apply to me, and one is dialed in, and that truly does drive better engagement. Unfortunately, we are running out of time here. Do you have any sort of last thoughts you want to? Yeah, go.
Let me finish with what you were just talking about, and that is nobody knows the employee better than their immediate manager. And this is one of those where, if you're focusing just on the employee, you get too much. You get too much stick, and it's impersonal. But one of the things with all of these training programs, if we look at the management and having them be able to understand the issue and then make it personal for the employee, I think that's one of the keys to success in being able to drive security awareness.
I
Sorry to interrupt. I just didn't want to. You teed that up beautifully.
No, I agree wholeheartedly about that, and I think that's a great point. Do you have any sort of closing thoughts that you want to leave with anybody? Really doesn't have to be about security awareness, anything at all.
Um, one of the bigger things that I push is if you want to be good at security, don't go into security. And it doesn't make sense on the face of it. But one of the things that you and I have been talking about, for the better part of the last hour, is actually understanding the base of the system that we're trying to hack, right? Hacking is understanding the system to the point where you can get it to do something it was never originally intended to do. And one of the things that I find that people who've been in security, we understand the underlying system. You keep talking about understanding this theory or that theory with understanding the human system, right? And one of the things that you started off asking me was, everybody wants to know how to break into security. Understand the system is my answer to that. Don't just go into security because there's a lot of money there and it's, I'm going to be the cool kid in the hoodie. It's really a matter of, if you want to break into security, understand the system. And once you understand the system, the security is an overlay. It's a point of view. And we talked about that earlier as well. It's a mindset that's all we've been talking about, is changing the mindsets and understanding of that sysadmin or of the employee or of the manager. And if you want to break into security, don't go into security, go understand the system, and then start learning about the security part of it. It'll come naturally. And those are the best security people I know.
Certainly the best hackers that I've ever had a chance to work with. They started out in generally multiple different positions within IT teams, everything from networking to sysadmin to help desk, and that broad understanding made them really good. And then I've also seen pen testers that started out on the developer side of things, and they bring a whole different point of view to pen testing. And I think that it's that, understanding that you talk about that is so critical. And that is where all of the coolest 0-day exploits come from, is a deep understanding of how things work that's being exploited. When you look at like the TCP/IP vulnerabilities, the processor vulnerabilities, like these crazy ones that we've seen, it's somebody that really understood the system
Mhm.
first, and then they were able to exploit it as a result. So couldn't agree
Exactly.
more. Yeah.
Exactly.
All right. Well, thank you for joining us for another episode.